subjects under the pressure of a deadline. I would sit in the cafeteria at lunchtime with friends who were enrolled in law and accounting and think to myself with smug glee how dull their courses sounded by comparison. I still feel that way about journalism, and I try not to take for granted how fortunate I am to have a job I enjoy so much. As a young reporter, I was sent on every sort of story imaginable: floods, droughts, court cases, protest marches, police raids, murder trials, environmental messes, lunches for the homeless, colour features about the Royal Brisbane Show, surf accidents, sporting scandals, political downfalls. One thing I quickly learned was that I was not one of those journalists who thrive chasing ambulances or disasters. I did not like coming face to face with tragedy or pain. I remember doing an overnight shift on the Chief of Staff desk at Channel 9 in 1994 and listening to the police scanner when 2 firefighters died battling a blaze in a Gold Coast home. The cameraman on the scene transmitted his footage back to me in the newsroom. He had captured their bodies being recovered from the house. My job was to make a list of all the key shots for the reporter who'd be assigned the story first thing in the morning. I was pretty certain that this was as close to death as I wanted to get. Over time, I gravitated to politics as much as possible, feeling more at ease dealing with a political tragedy than a genuine one. I spent the first 10 or so years of my career covering various news rounds and, amazingly, mostly managed to avoid first-hand exposure to true horror. I've never had to attend a car crash before the victims were cut from the vehicle, almost a rite of passage for many young journalists and police officers. I've never been sent to a war zone. I admire enormously my colleagues who do that sort of reporting because I know I do not have the courage or temperament for it. From late 2001, just after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, I was the North America correspondent for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. I didn't avoid disaster entirely. I was dispatched to New Orleans to cover the calamitous Hurricane Katrina, but my stint there was heavily dominated by the politics of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and the imprisonment of an Australian, David Hicks, at the US Military Detention Centre at Guantanamo Bay. I interviewed people who had lost family members in those wars, and I visited Guantanamo a few times. For me, it was not traumatic, because unlike the people I met and observed, I was able to return to my normal life after a few days. For the past decade, I've been largely studio-bound as an anchor, mostly on 7:30, the ABC's flagship nightly current affairs program. It is journalism of which I'm very proud, and I could not have more respect for my colleagues. In my role, I sometimes interview people on the best days of their lives, and often on the worst. I do so from the comfort and safety of an air-conditioned studio, but it can still be painful, night after night, to immerse myself in the misery of the news. At least a couple of nights a week, we run an item that comes close to reducing me to tears. In one fairly typical news month on 7:30, March 2016, we covered child sex abuse by Catholic priests, coal workers dying horrible deaths from black lung, Fijian people devastated by a cyclone, nursing home residents abused by their carers, insurance companies refusing to pay people in dire need even though they'd faithfully paid their premiums, a dance teacher who sexually abused children, a famous swimmer diagnosed with melanoma, 500 people suddenly losing their jobs at an oil refinery, a suicide bombing in Turkey, students abducted by a Thai junta, a woman whose face was smashed with a hammer by her partner, a terrorist attack at Brussels airport, and a television star's degeneration from multiple sclerosis. Of course, there were other happier stories too, but the sad ones seemed to make a stronger impact. Notably, on the day of a terrorist attack, a mass fatality accident, or some other major news story, the number of viewers watching 7:30 will almost certainly be bigger than usual. A public disaster appears to make television ratings spike. People seem perversely but irresistibly attracted to catastrophe when it happens to others, while in our daily lives we do everything possible to shield ourselves from these poison darts of fate. We eat leafy green vegetables, apply sunscreen, wear seatbelts, obey speed limits, quit smoking, walk for half an hour a day, install spongy ground under monkey bars and swings, ban peanut butter sandwiches in schools, limit coffee intake, cut down on saturated fats, don bicycle helmets, submit to wanding, patting, screening and x-raying every time we fly.